comparing him to Scott Rowland. There are some similarities of dominance. I think both are Hall of Famers. Let's start with Rowland. You saw him play. You saw him up close. Your thoughts on Scott Rowland as a candidate?
Well, I'm a little different than the two of you because I was working in Philadelphia when Scott Rowland showed up to make his debut, what was a unanimous Rookie of the Year, by the way, at age 21. And I watched that guy play third base. And I'll be honest with you, I'd never seen anything like that. I'd never seen anybody play third base like Scott Rowland did. And I saw Mike Schmidt play. You know, I've used this in my column. He was a combo platter of Brooks Robinson meets Lawrence Taylor because he played with so much ferocity. Look at the balls he got to. Look at where he threw the baseball from. If he could catch it, and he was sure he could throw you out from anywhere. And so, you know that feeling you get when you watch a great player do that great stuff? Mm-hmm. I've never forgotten that with Scott.
Okay, how about you, John? Where is he?
The pride of Jasper, Indiana, by the way. Runner-up for Indiana, Mr. Basketball. That award is not handed out lightly. Wow, and it was that athleticism that we saw on the bases for me. I love Scott Rowland, the base runner. We don't talk about him enough. And so I spoke with Skip Schumacher, who had been both his teammate and his opponent. And Skip actually said, once Scott went from the Cardinals to the Jays and eventually to the Reds, that Chris Carpenter got Skip Schumacher a pair of soccer shin guards to wear to incentivize him to stay in there on the double play, specifically for Scott Rowland. That was the understanding the Cardinals had about how ferociously, to Jason's point, that Scott would run the bases. So he actually changed the uniform of a current Major League manager in Skip Schumacher.
That's great. And it's great seeing the video of that because we can give credit to it. And you wonder, why is his WAR so high? Well, it's not just his offense, which was actually quite good. I think a 130, 133 OPS plus for a full decade. But, the defense was stellar. It was one of the greatest defenders we've seen of all time at the position. But base running is a plus. That helps your WAR number. And the base running isn't just some, esoteric thing. Joe DiMaggio's plaque is right over there. Joe DiMaggio was known as the hardest slider into a base in the game. He went in to take you out. It was you're not friends with everybody out there, and you want to compete, you want to get after it. Scott Rowland deserves extra credit for that. Let's get to the studio for a moment. Mark Feinsand and Steve Phillips are there. Mark, where are you on Scott Rowland?
I voted for Scott Rowland. I think he is a Hall of Famer for all the reasons that you guys mentioned. Jason mentioned his fielding acumen, 8 Gold Gloves at third base, and in each of those seasons, he had an OPS over 850. So this wasn't just a slick fielding guy who could hit a little bit. Really good hitter. You showed us a graphic yesterday, BK, that he's the 9th highest WAR amongst third basemen at 70.1. And when you looked at the guys who were 9th at every position, these are Hall of Fame type players, or in most cases, Hall of Famers. Third base is the most underrepresented position in the Hall of Fame. Only 17 third basemen in the Hall of Fame. And if he's one of the top 10 in terms of WAR and all these other things that we're talking about, I don't know how he's not a Hall of Famer.
Steve, how about you?
Yeah, overall a 70 WAR player. I mean, that alone puts him in a category of some of the elite players in the game. Now, he's a 20-plus defensive WAR. His defense, phenomenal. One of the top defensive players to ever play the game. The slow roller's the one for me, where he would come in, charging down the third baseline, barehanded, make that play. And then the number of times I saw him range, a lot like Nolan Arenado, where his back goes to the infield, down the left field line, and he turns and throws a laser across the infield. He was a guy who was a very good hitter, a great defender, and a hard-nosed, tough guy. We talk about all those slides. We don't get that anymore in baseball. We've banned that slide right now in baseball. But Scott Rowland, I got to tell you, it took me some convincing. Remember, he was very low in the beginning on his balloting, and he really has grown over time. And for me, I really got a greater appreciation for his defense and the impact of that on his career that has taken me to the point that he's on my ballot.
Yeah, he's just over 10% where he debuted. Guys, thanks so much. Let's now go to Todd Helton, who has really picked up traction as well. And Jason just mentioned, for people who weren't watching yesterday, it is very rare to go from 52% and get to 75.
Yeah, Todd Helton has a chance to get elected, and he was at 52% last year. That's never happened. Nobody has ever gone from 52 to 75 plus. The closest was Larry Walker, another Rocky, who went from 54 and change to 75 a couple of years back. So this would be unbelievable. unprecedented. It's kind of amazing, right? Like when I saw his votes begin to surge, I thought, did he get a couple hundred hits since the last election that I missed somewhere?
Well, Pete, you know what? We have to put the Coors Field numbers into context. John, Larry Walker, I made the point many times, like, wait, you shouldn't disqualify the guy.
Right.
Like, he still has those numbers, and he has those numbers on the road. Todd Helton, unlike Larry Walker, didn't have time with other teams to say, wait a second, with the Expos, with the Cardinals, the guy was still great. So where are we on Todd Helton?
It's OPS plus, and Jason did a great job of describing this. OPS plus, remember, adjusts for the ballpark factors. So when you consider where Helton ranks among the all-time leaders at that position in OPS plus or against his peers in OPS plus, Brian, as you know, that number already takes into consideration Coors Field. Wow. And a couple other things about it. Todd Helton played twice as many games, Brian, at Coors Field as any other player in history. Now, some would say, wow, that boosts his numbers. And I suppose on some level it does. But anyone who has played consistently in Denver will tell you playing at altitude is a challenge. Every time you leave there, go play in a different city, and come back, your body has to adjust. The demands on your body.
Most guys get hurt. Yeah, no question.
games at Coors Field. To me, I give Helton a gold star, not a demerit.
No, I'm going to push back on that graphic just a bit, though. I know for OPS plus, and I look at for all these candidates, where do you rank at your position with WAR? Where do you rank in OPS plus? I've got him 23rd overall in OPS plus. Now that's at first base. These are the best sluggers in the history of the game. I didn't do 2,000 games. I think, Jason, you set the bar a little too high, where you're eliminating a lot of guys. It's not like innings pitched, where you have to say, wait a second, for every inning you could give up more runs. He's more 23rd overall, which makes him more at the border than some slam dunk Hall of Famer.
All right, now I'm going to push back on your pushback. Okay. Is that okay? I think Todd Helton deserves credit for all those games played, as John was just saying, because he was playing in Denver, playing at altitude where the toll that it takes on the human body is greater than any other park in the sport. And I was telling you this morning, that you look at Todd Helton's 10-year peak, he averaged 154 games a year. Wow. That mattered to me playing at Coors Field. The other thing that's easy is look at road OPS. Like, nobody seems to discount Ken Griffin's road OPS or George Brett's. I mean, he was in the same general range as Griffey and Yaz, Brett, Winfield, and on top of a whole bunch of Hall of Famers in road OPS. Brian, that is very convincing to me.
I'm with you. I think he's right there, but you're kind of like setting the data set and with kind of not arbitrary points, but setting it to put the guy in the best possible light.
That's what we always do.
No. You should have an objective methodology, and if the guy arrives where, hey, this is important to me, where does he arrive? Then I go with that.
All right, let me do another one, since Clint Hurdle was talking about this on High Heat. There's a really cool tool on Baseball Reference called the Stat Neutralizer. Mm-hmm. So I fed Todd Helton's career. You can do it and feed it into any environment. So I took 2007 Coors, 2007 Great American Ballpark in Cincinnati, 2007 Philadelphia. And these are still Hall of Fame slash lines, and I'll do the math for you. Coors Field was only giving him an extra 4 hits a year and less than 1 homer a year over the course of his career.
Jason, can I ask you, what's the run-scoring environment 2007? It's pretty high, isn't it? That's not like a neutral year. What? Yes, he did.
That's why
he played. If you're punching it in the neutral, I've done this too. If you're punching that into Baseball Reference, if you want the ultimate offensive environment, you go for 2000 and you go for Colorado. That's what Todd Helton was operating in. He had the ultimate offensive environment. So you need to knock him down, not to 1968 Dodger Stadium, but you got to find something more fair.
I took the time he played in, and I was measuring him against players he played against.
But that's
You're going to make the case for Chase Utley. He was playing in 2007 in Philadelphia in that park.
And I would use OPS Plus, which takes into account the run-scoring environment. You did that, but you did that for guys who played 2,000 games. You're setting the bar at the point where you will lose 21st basemen.
Quick point on Rolen and Helton both, Brian. No matter what happens. And the reason why everyone should stay with us throughout the day of our programming is because we are headed for a decision on both Rolen and Helton that I believe will be in the single digits of votes, making it or not making it.
Right.
This, I believe, is going to be under 10 for both of them. This is going to be a historic election.
Close.
We've got two different players, probably 10 votes or under.
Look, I'm just pushing back on you. If I'm in a room,
I'm trying to make peace there, but
I don't like. I don't like the specious logic. I just know if we're in a room and we're in a veterans committee, and you're like, BK, we need one more vote for Todd Helton. Of course, he's right there. Let me go to Mark Feinsand, who is my former nemesis, but maybe he can help me on this. Now, Mark, where are you as far as making the adjustment from Coors Field and in a very high run scoring environment?
Well, I looked at his adjusted OPS plus 133, which you mentioned. That would be higher than Tony Gwynn, Joe Morgan, Carl Yastrzemski, Wade Boggs, Ron Carew, all lock first ballot type
Those guys
Hall of
aren't playing
Famers.
first base, Mark. Hold on. Now, you got to go first baseman. You can't go Joe Morgan.
Ron Carew played
stealing
first base.
70 bases at second base.
How about this? 6th highest batting average, 6th highest on-base percentage since the expansion era of any player. So I look at Helton's
But now you're
career.
not park adjusting.
I look at Helton's career.
But you got to park it. If you don't park adjust it, he's getting Denver.
Here's the thing,
that
BK.
Denver is going to inflate it.
Coors Field is a major league ballpark. The games there count. That's where he played. I look at his numbers as a whole.
Yeah, but
I
you
look
need
at the
to put it in the proper
consistency.
context.
You do need to put it in proper context. Look, the 2000 game, maybe picking little nits in terms of trying to do it, but I think it shows the level of consistency this guy had and the level of excellence this guy had. Sorry, BK. I'm with Jason on this one.
Yeah.
No, look, that's fine. I'm with Jason on this one, except by the way he got there. Steve, your thoughts on it? Because look, if you're looking at this, it's almost like looking at the original sabermetric point was a guy who hits 300 in 1930 is not like hitting 300 in 1968. The guy who hits 300 in 1968 is leading the league. The whole league hit 300 in 1930. So I'm just trying to put it in context. Give me something on Todd Helton, Steve.
Yeah, so I think Jason's logic was flawless and easy to follow, and I'm in complete agreement with it as well.
Thank you.
That
Here's the
doesn't
thing.
surprise me.
The other thing, the other thing is Todd Helton passes the gut check for me. He was one of the most feared guys. When he came to the plate against my teams, we were scared to death. He was absolutely going to come up with a big hit. He was going to drive the ball. He was phenomenal. And, oh, by the way, he was a great defender. He's a 3-time Gold Glove Award winner as well. And I'm with you. I think the road OPS matters. I think it matters. There are Hall of Famers who had lower road OPSs that we sort of take for granted because it's not Coors Field. I think the Larry Walker candidacy is responsible for the big bump for Todd Helton. That now that we see Larry Walker, everybody's started to figure out where to put Coors Field. I think we've got a better understanding about Todd Helton. In my mind, he's absolutely a Hall of Famer.
You know what, and Steve, I think the most valid thing you said there that I no longer slam is it's the gut check, right? The eye test, whatever you want to call it. That's your inner computer at work, but it comes from a sophisticated kind of like your own internal algorithm. I used to slam that with the gut check, but I think there are things that are informing that. 20 years ago, I would have yelled at Steve for that, but now I won't. So of the Veterans Committee, that debate isn't over, but it is an official turning of the page. Bonds, Clemens, and Schilling took up a lot of psychological space in the voters' heads, and they also absorbed a lot of votes. Last year, Bonds and Clemens were near 65 and 66%, and Schilling, who was once higher, fell to 58%. Those three took in nearly 750 votes. Now, voters don't have to use all those votes this year. They can name 10, they can name 0, but it sure frees things up. Voters can now refocus their attention and give a fresh evaluation to a new crop of players. Scott Rowland, Todd Helton, and Billy Wagner are all up over 50%, and Andrew Jones is up over 40% of the vote. He needs 75% for induction. Rowland is the only one within normal striking distance. Mike Messina went from 63 to 77% in year 6. The same year Rowland is in now. A jump from 50 to 75%, that usually doesn't happen. All 4 of those players I mentioned debuted during the PED logjam. Most were lucky to stay on the ballot. You need 5% of the vote to just stay on the ballot. Jim Edmonds, Bernie Williams, Kenny Lofton all fell below and were dropped. That doesn't make sense, but it happened. Scott Rowland debuted at 10%, got to 53% in 2021, reached 63% last year. He could make the leap to 75% in 1 year. Happens that way a lot. Todd Helton debuted at a more healthy 16.5%. He was at 52% in year 4 last year. Billy Wagner debuted at 10%. That's low. He was up to 51% last year, also moving up. And Andrew Jones debuted at 7%. That's close to the 5%. But he got to 41% in year 4 on the ballot last year. And it's the 10th and final year for Jeff Kent. Kent isn't a sabermetric darling, but he's the all-time home run leader at second base and was absolutely a peak impact performer. He's been around 32 or 33% the last 2 years, so it is very unlikely he makes a big run to 75%. That is historically too much ground to cover. But the field is open to a surge for Jeff Kent, who absolutely deserves a fresh look. I think it's very important for that particular group of players to make a big jump this year, to get in or at least get close. Because this year, Carlos Beltran makes his debut on the ballot. Beltran is a very strong candidate. He is likely, though, to take a pretty big hit for his part in the Astros sign-stealing scandal. He was a big part of that. So the players need to make that jump now, because Beltran might be hanging around for a little bit, and the ballot is about to get crowded again. Next year, a strong debut class. Adrian Beltre, Chase Utley, and Joe Mauer. I think all three are Hall of Famers. You also have David Wright, Matt Holliday, Adrian Gonzalez. I don't think they get in, but they certainly get some votes. In 2025, it's Ichiro and CC Sabathia, with a bunch of candidates just below who are pretty good. Dustin Pedroia, King Felix, and more. The point is, Beltran might stay on the ballot with some big classes coming. You can lose momentum in this voting. It happens a lot. And you only have 10 years. This is the year for Rolen, Helton, Wagner, and Jones to get in or get close enough for a final push. And back here live in the plaque gallery now. So will that be enough? Do you think, I said, a fresh evaluation, enough people to look at it and say, all right, now that I don't have to think about all those guys, let me think about that. Should Rolen or Helton get my vote? Do you think that happens?
I'm seeing good trends, generally speaking, but I'm also a little bit concerned that we as an electorate are not doing a good enough job of electing deserving candidates in a timely fashion. The timely fashion part is crucial. Billy Wagner should be a Hall of Famer tonight. He should be getting in tonight. If he's not, he has 2 more cracks at this. And he should not be on the ballot next year when we're competing with spots for the likes of Utley and Mauer and Beltre. We need to do a better job, Jason, of transitioning players into this Hall of Fame, into this great plaque gallery, so that way the next generation gets a fair hearing.
All right. Well, let me just say to that, it is supposed to be hard, and I understand that part. I agree with you in principle, but I do like the fact that it's hard. So I'm conflicted on this. What I'm fascinated by is, as Brian was saying, where these votes are coming from this year for all these big surges. And, you know, thanks to the Hall of Fame tracker that Ryan Thibodeau does, we can dig in on this. I can tell you that more than half of the new votes for Todd Helton have come from players who didn't have room for him last year. Their ballots were full.
That's interesting.
Same for Wagner. Same for Sheffield. Andrew Jones at 60%. Jeff Kent over 80% of his extra added votes coming from players who didn't, or voters who didn't have room last year. Scott Rolen, only 15%. You know why? He was already on those ballots. That's why you're seeing this great shifting in the percentages this year.
You bring up a good point, though, John, in that, and you're arguing with it and against it, Jason, but it's, are we doing a proper job of getting a representation from this era? Steve, why don't you start on that? Go back to Steve Phillips and Mark Feinstein. Steve, are we doing a good enough job? Because I don't, again, if you look at the percentage of guys who are playing in the 1920s, a good lot of them are in the Hall of Fame. We start to think that nobody is good enough anymore to get into the Hall of Fame. Where are you on that?
Well, I think a lot of the numbers have been skewed a bit by the steroid era, because some of the great players also were tied to PEDs and therefore aren't getting in, so we look like we're underrepresented a little bit. But I think it's interesting because many of the candidates on the ballot this year have some issue. Right? There's something about him. So Rolen's defense is a lot better than his offense was. And, you know, you look at Carlos Beltran. He's got the sign-stealing scandal. Billy Wagner's only had 900 innings pitched in his career. And so everybody's got something that sells them, but something that you have to kind of get over and get a certain perspective on it. And I think the reason we're seeing a surge is that I think the writers are listening to each other. They're hearing people talk about why this guy is there, why this guy's not. And I think value is being recalculated as we speak from year to year, considering these players.
Steve, you lead me into something. Let me jump in before, Mark, you do. I think it's an excellent point. Not only were the PED guys not getting in, the PED guys' numbers made everybody else look anemic, right? Even Fred McGriff, 493 home runs, suddenly, it's not so great. Everyone's got 600 these days. So it kind of knocked guys back. Mark Feinsand voted for the PED guys. So, Mark, justify that. Like, it kind of did skew things for a number of years.
It did, and it leaves me wondering about next year's ballot, because for the last few years I've been saying, okay, I vote for Bonds, I vote for Clemens. Eventually they'll be off the ballot, and that'll open up some space for me to look at other guys. Helton and Wagner got on my ballot this year with those 2 spots. If nobody gets elected this year, well, only Jeff Kent's coming off, and I voted for Jeff Kent. So I have 1 spot open next year if I carry the other 9 over, and with Beltre and Mauer and Utley, all of a sudden there's 3 guys. So I'm going to have to now determine if I think those 3 guys all deserve votes, which 2 guys on my ballot deserve to get moved off. That's where maybe I will look at the PED situation and say, I vote for Alex Rodriguez and Manny Ramirez. They're not getting in. Because even voters who voted for Bonds and Clemens, half of those voters didn't vote for A-Rod and Manny. So, the crowded ballot is definitely an issue for voters.
All right. Thank you, Mark. Good. Well put. And I took a gratuitous shot at Mark, and he didn't bite, so I'll just back off.
I'm just used to it by now, BK.
No, I'm going to back off. You did the right thing. That was a smart thing to do. When we come back, again, we just went through this with the Veterans Committee. It's a matter of, do you have to justify bad behavior? That's what we're talking about. How about rewarding good behavior?